what we've been doing in terms of water resources, water quality, that sort of thing. And we invited all you folks here to share some of the things that your groups are doing now in terms of water, West Dakota Water Development District. And so, welcome. We did this 3 years ago. We'd hoped to do it earlier, but the COVID thing kind of jinxed that, so we're back. So we're actually having a meeting here of the West Dakota, so there's some protocol things that we're going to do. And the first thing we're going to do is do the roll call. Dan Mullally, please.
Okay, roll call.
We can put on the chair right here for you.
You know, that's my purse, but this is...
Cole. Yerke.
Here.
Driscoll.
Here.
McGregor. Monagle. Rose.
Here.
Mack. Fleming. Harris.
Here.
We have 4 directors present. We're short of a quorum, although we don't need one.
Yeah, we don't need one, and I think Dennis will be here shortly. He had a doctor's appointment. The next item that we're going to do is approve the agenda that everyone, if you didn't get a copy of the agenda, we do have some over here on the table that you can follow along with. But is there a motion to approve the agenda for today's meeting?
So moved.
Moved by Dan, seconded by Cheryl. Any discussion on the motion? All in favor of the motion indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed, same sign. Motion carried. Before we get to introductions, I just wanted to point out that after we go through our program today and have a roundtable discussion, we are going to have a happy hour, very important, over at Kelly's, and you're all invited. If you come, we'll just have some casual conversation and get to know one another, but just wanted to let you know you're all invited. So this is after our meeting.
And that will be in the back room at Kelly's. There's a back room there that they've got reserved for us. And
thank you for doing that.
Folks can order off the menu if you so desire, and a couple of us directors are going to set up a few refreshments there, compliments of us.
Very good.
We hope you'll come and join us. This gives you a little time, if you've not heard before, to perhaps call your better half and invite them. Everybody, everybody's welcome. So.
Are you buying?
Yeah, you too. You said you'd split. Dinner, you're on your own.
Okay, so at this point we're going to have introductions from everybody, and just go around the table, tell them who you are and what organization, if you are involved with an organization here today, and tell a little bit about yourself. But we do have some formal presentations that we're going to do, so we want to, to keep this thing going, we want to not spend an hour on introductions, if you know what I mean. So, Dan, we'll start with you.
I'm Dan Mullally. I'm the program administrator with West Dakota Water Development District.
Dan Driscoll, one of the many Dans, Area 3 Director.
Cheryl Rowe, Director for District 6.
And I'm Dan Bierke. I'm the chairman, and I represent Area Number 2 in the Development District.
Linda Harris, Area 9, and I'm also the secretary.
Cheryl Chapman, Executive Director, Western Dakota Regional Water System.
Jeff Crockett, City of Rapid City, Water Division.
Glenn Kane, I'm the Managing Director of the South Dakota Water Development Authority.
Quentin Neff, in the past, I was here for Town of Keystone. This year I'm here for the South Dakota Mineral Industries Association.
Jim Cameron from Kara Jones Water Association.
Heidi Syrian, South Dakota.
Bill Eldridge with the USGS.
Galen Homestrad, also with USGS. Travis Lasher with Bain County Water Division, District 4.
Brittany Hollander, National Director. Good afternoon, Susie Engelbert, Program Manager, Watershed, Supervisor's Office of Water.
I'm Melissa Dempsey. I'm a hydrologist with the Black Hills National Forest and the Spearfish.
I'm Joanne Royce. I'm with the Department of Ag and Natural Resources, Geological Survey here in Rapid City. Osborne. I'm with the Department of Ag and Natural Resources in the Watershed Protection Program.
I'm Jesse Wilkins. I'm also with South Dakota Ag and Natural Resources. I'm an environmental scientist in the Watershed Protection Program.
I'm Jenny Larson. I'm also with the Department of Agriculture and Natural Resources, and I'm also with the
John Carrero with South Dakota Game and Fishing Parks.
I'm Melissa Smith. I'm a hydrologist with the National Weather Service.
Eric Wolfman with USGS.
Jay Gilbertson with the East Dakota Water Development District.
Hey, we got some back here.
I'm Robert Ackerman, and I will be Director of Area 5 for the West Dakota Water Development District if I live that long.
I'm Crystal Lesmeister. I'm with the Bureau of Reclamation.
Steve Fuller, I'm with the United States Geological Survey.
Okay, thank you very much. So the next item on the agenda is to have a brief overview of West Dakota Water Development District projects, and Dan Driscoll is going to present that for us.
Okay, and before I start, I don't know if we pointed out there's a sign-in sheet here if people would sign in, and was there a spot on that for email addresses to where we could email people?
Yeah.
And there's name tags also. If you've not got one, you might put one of those on at some point in time. It helps people know who's who. So beyond that, Dan, can you set that up on the slideshow mode to where the...
Well, I can't because the recording won't.
Oh.
It'll screw up the screen recording.
Okay, so we'll live with it. It's got some animations, lets you bring things in, but I'll live with it. You're wanting to record it, and that'll be fine. So the intent, can everyone hear me okay?
Yeah.
The intent here is really just to give a few examples of some of the many projects that West Dakota is involved with and has been involved with over the years. Going to kind of lean away from details for the most part, kind of a broad brush overview just to kind of give an example, idea of what sort of things we could be involved with, and it might help create ideas. Maybe there's something that your agency would have in mind that might be a fit. So we don't know how long our session today is going to take. After we do this, we've got a few invited talks, as Dan mentioned, and then kind of a round-robin thing where everybody can just tell each other a little bit about what's going on. We know we have to be out of here. Is it 4:30 we've got to close up in time to break it down and be vacated by 5?
I think so.
Yeah, that should be enough time.
Yeah.
So I'm going to keep this fairly short. If there's short questions, just throw them out as we go. I'll have maybe 10 minutes worth here or whatever. If they seem like longer questions, might be discussion items, let's hold them until I finish my little piece, and then trade a few things around. So for starters, there's two projects we're involved with that are going to be part of agenda item 6, the invited talks. One of those is on the Missouri River Pipeline project, and then also the Black Hills Rotating Basin study. And so I'm going to do no more than mention those and go on to the next slide. So kind of a new endeavor for us, and kind of a major endeavor, is a couple of projects that really have a goal of improving water quality in Rapid Creek, primarily by reducing suspended sediment loading. Several projects fall under a general umbrella of what we call erosion control projects, revegetating some highly erosive slopes. Another kind of general category is improved stormwater management. So I'll have a few more details on these as we go. Next. So I don't know how well people can see these. I guess we don't have a very big slide, but or screen. Under the erosion control end of things, our main endeavor there is on the north side of Star Village. If anybody's ever noticed that, and if you've not noticed it, go take a look. we're doing a lot of work there, but there's about 5 acres that's totally blowing out there. Along the top, I see it right up close, so I know exactly what I'm looking at, but there's a head cut there. I'm guessing that there's about 2 feet of material that's been eroded from this area over the course of the last maybe 5 decades or so, and that head cut keeps advancing upward. Eventually it would reach the houses up there. That'd probably take some time, but that's kind of one of the main endeavors, is to try to stop that where it's at. You can see a photo in the lower right that Dan Mullally took it from East Boulevard looking up the hill. That's erosion control blanket that's placed up there. And then of the 2 red boxes there, the one on the lower left, it's hard to see the gullies from there. There's a poster over here. You could have a look at it. You can see really what we're dealing with, but we'll see that again on another slide. So if you go on to the next slide, Dan, here's the grass that's coming in up where we put the blanket in. Actually, our source of topsoil was dredged sediment from Canyon Lake, another project that West Dakota had been involved with. And John Guerrero there, he arranged for what was about 30 side dump loads to be delivered out there. And
it was, yeah, a lot of material.
Quite a bit of material. And along the top there, I can just barely see them, so I'm sure it's hard for most folks, but there's what we call wattles, erosion control socks. So there's actually 2 rows of them, and we're kind of pinning one tight up against the head cut, and then another one a couple feet down. And one of the things we'd been scattering some branches in there, pine trees we'd limbed, and that looked so good. In the far right, you can see green grass clippings from about a day before I took the photo. I started dumping lawn waste, yard waste up there, and actually I started last fall, and there's leaves, and they didn't even blow away this winter. Everything's staying right where it's been. Farther to the east there, I can't see them from here, but there's a lot of tree limbs. So just kind of throwing organic matter there, and so far it's working. Next slide shows us topsoiling. That's Bierke's side-by-side and a little trailer there, and we had a bobcat to load it with, and it was about a 5-minute round trip, I suppose. And once it got there, we'd have 3 or 4, however many guys break out the shovels and shovel it off there. So
volunteers
and slave labor. It's kind of a unique thing. A lot of the work is being done by directors. And have you got anything in East Dakota, anything like that, Jay, where you've got directors out there working away for hours on end?
He's a smart
they
man.
would look at me and go, "Why am I here?"
Most of the time, these water boards are, deciding how to dole out our funds, and this is a pretty neat deal. So the next slide, here's the deep rills, basically looking uphill from East Boulevard. There we've placed little short wattles in the draws and stake them down, letting them fill in, see if Mother Nature will fill them in. It's way too steep to try to get vegetation to grow there, so we're kind of trying to let Mother Nature help us. You can see some brown on up there. These are more tree limbs where we've limbed, and just throw them into the gullies and see if they'll accumulate some sediment and make a little organic matter for something to grow. The red subtitle there, we need more volunteers. It's very labor intensive. There's a poster back here. You can see some more details, and there's a sign-up sheet. If anybody would be inclined to help, put down your name and an email, and I'll put you on a list when we notify people of work efforts. And if you would know anybody that might be inclined, a lot of this is really best geared for retirees. We kind of tend to work oftentimes for a few hours on weekday mornings, but if you know people that might be civic-minded and kind of environmentally oriented, maybe check with them and see if they would be willing to volunteer. So next slide, We've got a similar project over at the School of Mines campus in the southwest corner of the campus. This is kind of a bench scale effort, kind of testing various methods, and Heidi Sieverding, who's here, is kind of a primary on that, and she might mention a little more as we go around the table. Then there's actually quite a few. You get to looking at the area from, Star Village on out to the School of Mines, and then back around the other side along St. Pat. There's a lot of this stuff in eastern Rapid City. So this is kind of a test scale project. Next slide shows one more over at LaCroix Links, which is now a disc golf. So there's a hillside like that. We've got about the top third or so of that hillside peppered with wattles, and there's a certain amount of vegetation there. I'm optimistic it might kind of start filling in, and once I figured out how good this yard waste looks, we'll start getting some of that in there as time and workforce permit. Next slide. Similarly, out in the west side of town, a lot of red shale there. We've had earlier discussions with both National Guard and the folks from the school system at Stevens High. They're interested in doing work like that. Right now our plate is full, but I think within the next year or so we'll probably try to get a project there up and running. So next slide will evolve into the stormwater management arena. It's not rocket science that the single biggest detriment to Rapid Creek water quality ecology is urban stormwater runoff. Our thought is that there's many impervious areas in Rapid City that were constructed prior to stormwater management practices, which are now required. Many areas without adequate detention. So a first step for us, we're nearing completion on the second phase of what we call a stormwater inventory project. The intent there is just to inventory impervious areas, primarily commercial, and then things like churches, daycare, etc., non-residential for the most part, and put together a ranking system to help rank them relative to viability for implementing future projects. And the viability end of it is really how could we get the most mileage out of the least amount of money? What would be the lowest hanging fruit? So we're near the completion on that. Hope to be finished soon, and then in the future maybe we'll kind of move into an implementation phase. So the next slide just shows an example of kind of what we're looking for. This is the Four Seasons Sports Center out on East St. Pat, and you can see a concrete runway there coming directly off of a parking lot. And then the next slide shows that runway taking it straight down to the gutter. Not exactly what you like to see, and it'd be a pretty simple thing. Wouldn't take very many hours with a backhoe and a couple of dump trucks to excavate a little bit of a detention cell there. So that would be a fairly easy fix, especially if you'd happen to have road construction going on there, for instance. So just an example. The next slide shows actually an early project West Dakota helped partner on. That was at the Trinity Eco Prayer Park down on 4th and St. Joe, and that's after a rainstorm that no doubt exceeded the design flood, but an early project and a good one. Next slide shows the green roof project out at the Rapid City Airport. So basically that's vegetation mixed in amongst various other things out on one of the roofs. I've never actually seen it, but good little project for us. So moving on, just talk about a few more of our current projects. West Dakota's been a long-term partner with USGS cooperators. They're typically called on stream gauging. I forget how many gauges we fund, and two are, and we don't necessarily fund the whole thing. Actually, one thing I'll mention, on some of these gauges, they're funded by other entities. One of the things that tends to be a really good fit for us is when we can bring multiple partners to the table. You know, for us to be able to leverage our funds. You know, we generate a little over $200,000 a year in tax revenue, and you know, there's limits to how far it can go. So we really like to be able to leverage with other entities. So we are partnering with Game and Fish on boat inspections for aquatic invasives. That's a good example. Other partners on that are the Pennington Conservation District. Bureau of Rec was involved last year, not this year. Is that correct, John? Or is Bureau of Rec involved this year?
Well, we had one grant. We still have money in that grant from them.
Yeah. Any other partners on that one, or?
Fish and Wildlife Service.
Okay, that's right. Yeah, they're kind of the heavy hitter this year. A new one for us is partnering with the Pennington Conservation District for a project to implement conservation practices along Rapid Creek. It's what they call a CIS grant, Conservation Innovation Strategies, I think. That would be in the ag areas downstream from the city. It's our first year, but I think they're probably in the second or third. They had an earlier phase that still going. One of our biggest projects financially is assisting the Green Valley subdivision on sanitary sewer installation. That's out in Rapid Valley. It's been kind of a problem area for a lot of years, and maybe we'll hear more about that as we move on today. Many of you attend the annual hydrology conference here in April. West Dakota, one of several sponsors on that project. Next slide. One that's kind of trying to move into perhaps the second phase is what we call systems analysis modeling for Rapid Creek and the two reservoirs upstream. This project was completed in 2019 as a master's project by Rosemary Squillis under supervision of Dr. Waterman. The gist of it was to evaluate 9 different operational scenarios, really looking to address the question, would it be possible to increase the wintertime releases without having adverse effects on reservoir storage, essentially the water that's used later in the summer for municipal water supply and irrigation. So, you know, the prognosis there was pretty favorable that there might be some viability there. So recently we initiated discussions, basically initiated by West Dakota and involving, of course, Bureau of Rec, City of Rapid City, Game, Fish, and Parks. And was there anyone else on that one so far? And there could be potential for other players to join in on that one. Next slide. Many more past projects. The dredging of Canyon Lake, like I say, the source for our topsoil up there at Star Village. We've worked with USGS. They did some water quality sampling both before the dredging and then afterwards to see if there might be any discernible differences. A couple of projects looking at water quality in Rapid Creek. Sources of bacteria has been talked about for a lot of years. We've been involved with that, and Diddymo's kind of quieted down, but we've been involved in research there at the front end of it. I forget how many years back, but West Dakota had been one of many partners on a TMDL project for Spring Creek. Next slide. For many years we worked with Dr. Lisby at the School of Mines to fund student projects doing geologic mapping, most of that done relative to groundwater resources, whether availability or potential quality. I've worked frequently long-term with USGS on groundwater flow modeling. Worked with USGS, one I'd been involved with a lot when I was there, paleo flood study, City of Rapid City, DOT were partners on that. Very informative piece of work. Very long-term effort. West Dakota had always been a lead cooperator on the Black Hills hydrology study that went on for something more than 10 years. Also involved, various other counties in the Black Hills area. That's just kind of where I stopped my list. There's more you could talk about, but I think that gives everybody kind of an overview. So with that, we can certainly take a couple of minutes for questions or follow-up discussion. I should have mentioned, it's too late now, but if the directors had anything to chime in, now's a good time too.
No, I think you covered it pretty well. Is there any questions for Dan or anybody here from the board on what we've been doing with our monies that there's taxpayers' money, and that's, we feel that we need to continue in that direction of making sure the water quality that we use here in Pennington County is the highest quality as possible. Any questions?
Yeah, just one over the last few days or weeks with all the rain, that's held up pretty well at Star Village, or?
I was out there with Ron Koth about 6 weeks ago, and we were talking about maybe whether we might be able to get like the fire department to come in with fire hoses and water our grass. It had gotten started late last summer and fall, and it was looking really rough, and somewhere along the line we eked out a little rain, and then we eked out another one, and well, you saw the slide. That was taken not very long ago. So what we've got is a real nice stand of wheat that's a nurse crop, and then we've got about 10 different varieties of grass in there they're trying to grow.
I've been driving out there too, just to see when we've had some of these higher intensity rains that we've had, and quite honestly, there's a very, very little silt that's getting down on that street and getting on East Boulevard to head over to Rapid Creek. So it's definitely made a big difference in what's been done so far out there. There's more to be done, obviously, but one of the things that we had 2 property owners that were very cooperative to allow us to do that. And matter of fact, the gal that was running the backhoe, and she was one of the property owners.
The Bobcat.
Bobcat. Yeah. But they really helped us make that project go forward. It was a good cooperative program.
One furthermore, the landowners, Phil and Yvonne Wager, that own the largest chunk, it's like 14 acres. This winter, the city council voted to acquire that project as a future city park. So it's now owned by Rapid City. They tried to give it away years ago, and the city wouldn't take it because it's such a liability. But actually, a guy named Roger Heacock had known the Wagers. Phil had decided to try to put together a nonprofit to get people involved, and Heacock is on the Citizen Advisory Board for the Parks Department, and he talked it up a little bit, and the fact that West Dakota's in there working on it, they decided instead of a liability, it could be an asset. So that's going to be a real game changer for us to be able to have them help bring resources to the table.
And they donated the land to the city.
Oh yeah.
That was a donation, so it's going to be a nice city park down the road for the city.
There's about another dozen acres of city property surrounding the 2 big water reservoirs up there on the west side of Star Village, so there'll be close to 30 acres there. Once you get it fixed up to where you can have. Right now, you really don't want people in there. That'll change over time. It'll take a few years.
All right, I think we're ready to move on. Thanks, Dan, for that presentation. So that moves us to the invited talks. And the first item that we have is from Jay Gilbertson from the East Dakota Water Development District, and he's going to give us a report on different legislative items that might be of interest to us here at this forum. So, Jay, you have the floor.
All right.
Or you can stay sitting.
Could you stand at the mic?
Sure. Mark, if you can hear me. I'll go
With that voice, you can.
I'm going to carry all my stuff.
Thanks for driving out, by the way, Jay.
Oh, not a problem.
Appreciate it.
Not a problem. Left early, had a chance to stop at the Badlands, did a little rock hunting, and a bunch of good things. All right, well, again, as Dan, yeah, I just say as Dan said, and one of them said it was me. I'm Jay Gilbertson. I'm the manager of the East Dakota Water Development District out of Brookings. We're on the other side of the state, but a very similar organization, at least structurally, to West Dakota. We are quite a bit bigger. We encompass most of the Big Sioux River watershed, along with portions of the Minnesota, Upper Vermilion, and a little bit of the James. About 10.5 counties as opposed to just part of one. That's okay. Someday you'll get bigger.
Yeah.
Yeah, someday. And like West Dakota, we can be involved in a wide variety of activities, as we have over the years, kind of depending on whatever the board wants us to do or wants me to do, or staff, or whatever I can convince them to get involved with. But anyway, but today I've been asked to talk a little bit about the legislative, what happened during the last session and how that might apply to water. And if you followed the legislature at all, the answer is, oh my God, yes. There were lots of, well, one thing in particular, but a lot of different issues during the last legislative session. Courtesy of the American Recovery Plan Act, ARPA, passed to the federal government about 14, 15 months ago at this point. The state of South Dakota received $974.5 million of ARPA funds, which are intended to stimulate economic growth and get things going after the COVID shutdown and other difficulties. When the funds were initially made available, the uses that were clearly understood to be acceptable for ARPA money, it was a pretty short list of things. There was a lot of hope, particularly at the county level, on what they would do, but the real details were pretty slim. Fortunately, one of the things was, or one of the activities was basically water and wastewater infrastructure. If you had a drinking water system or a wastewater system, clearly and without a doubt, ARPA money could get spent on that activity. And the concern there is if you take the money, spend the money, and then at some point the feds come along and go, yeah, we're not sure that was the right thing, they're going to ask for their money back. And that's always kind of an ugly deal. And so, as in the build-up to the legislative session, $975 million laying there. A lot of discussion went on, and eventually the state settled on allocating essentially $660 million of that 975 toward water for pretty much everybody in this room except the Game Fish and Parks folks, because Danner doesn't get any of that money. The important part is the $600 million that went into Senate Bill 52 that was made available for, well, I'll just read the open section 1. There is hereby appropriated the sum of $600 million in federal fund expenditure authority to the Board of Water and Natural Resources for the purpose of providing grants for eligible water, wastewater, stormwater, and non-point source projects in accordance with the guidance provided in Section 2 of this Act, monies, blah, blah, blah. So basically, $600 million, water, wastewater, stormwater, and non-point source gets added in there. That bill was very short to begin with. Just said, give us the money, we'll give it to the big board, trust us, they'll do it okay, and we'll move on. The legislature could not understandably, could not wrap their head around $600 million in a single bill. It's the largest appropriations bill ever in the state of South Dakota, probably by a factor of 2 or 3. And they were just nervous as all get out. And so what the final bill entails is the process by which the Board of Water and Natural Resources was going to follow anyway. It's the same one they've been using for 40 years for allocating funds. They look at what you're going to do, they look at local match, they look at need, You know, if you're not charging, the city of Rapid City's not charging anybody for the water, and they come in and they'd like a big grant, well, of course you would like a grant. Charge your people some money. My favorite on that was Big Stone City. Anyone besides Joanne know where Big Stone City? It's on the far corner, well, Jesse, yeah. Way out there in the middle of nowhere. For ages, they charge $15 a quarter for water. Whether you were a single little old lady living in a shotgun shack or a cheese plant, you paid 15 bucks. Well, obviously that didn't pay the bills. When the water tower fell over, they got all excited. And we need a grant. No, you need reality. But the board has long since, courtesy of some Rapid City folks, Jim Bell, John Laux, on the board at the time, brought sanity to that process. And so there's a well-developed procedure for allocating funds. You apply, you go through all this sort of stuff. There's a review process. For the most part, there's very little political favor type stuff. That's all been removed. But typically they'd only deal with $15 million a year through that process. $600 million of grants alone is a little bit bigger. And so the process was finally finished. In the final version, and I'll bring some of this up because it's going to be pertinent for Cheryl's talk in a few minutes, in addition to setting up a process that the water and wastewater funding can go out, and eligible engineering studies for projects that contend with long-term drought resiliency, drinking water availability issues, or water and wastewater regionalization projects may be awarded a grant of up to 100% project cost. Okay. They've given away about $500 million of that money right now. One grant met that requirement. Your pipeline project. The planning and development of a big West River pipe from pier to here is qualified for that. So, although there will undoubtedly be others asking. Anyway, so Senate Bill 62 has pumped a tremendous amount of money into the system. The first award cycle in mid-April, a little over $406 million in ARPA grants, a companion $700 million in loans went out with that. As I said, outside of the big pipe grant, pretty much everybody else, if you got money, and you sometimes maybe got a lot, you also had to take on a loan. And for some of the larger communities and systems, that's worked out well. For some of the smaller ones, we've heard, or it's my understanding that some of those grants that were awarded just a month and a half ago have actually been turned back. You know, I'm trying to think of Wasta. I go to little towns back home, but I have to do one out here. You know, Wasta has a $10 million project. They get an $8 million grant. Oh my God, what a wonderful deal. $8 million. But that's a $2 million loan. And all 8 people can't pay that off. They figured that out. They were hoping to get 10. They got 8, which is a lot, but that last 2. So there are some projects coming back already. Even one of the rural water systems, Clark, gave theirs up apparently. And so this process will continue of allocation probably through March of next year. We think that's when most of the original funds will be allocated by that. So if you are a water and wastewater facility and you haven't applied for some, get going. And if you have, start planning on another one. There may still be money left over. I mentioned 660. There was an additional $60 million that was dedicated just to state projects. The bulk of those will go to, all the state office complexes, university systems, game fish and parks facilities around the state for comparable water and wastewater upgrade activities. So a total of $660 million out of that 975. So water did pretty good on that front. A few other items. The regular omnibus funding bill with only about $15 million came through. Of note in that, from a Western water perspective, there was about a little over $1 million in what's called SWARMS funding, State Water Resource Management System funding, that was allocated to the Water Rights Program for the installation of some deep groundwater monitoring wells in the crystalline rock stuff the state survey simply can't get down to. So they'll be upgrading some of their existing wells and installing some new deep bedrock wells out here in the hills with $1 million courtesy of Swarms. And another $250,000 is going to a dam, DAM project up in Watertown. Although if you remember what Mahoney was like at the end, it works. There were a few other bills that came in looking for some of the ARPA funding. They were, for the most part, ignored, fought off by the legislature. All the money we wanted all the money to go through one place. We didn't want each and every little entity, to come in, and ours is, we want everyone, we'd like to share with everybody, but we'd like to get our money first. Okay, we only had one of those bills. It got taken out fairly quickly, and the rest of it is all being done pretty easily through there. A few other things that came through, if you're on the Conservation Commission side, and I didn't hear anyone here from the Conservation Districts, but Conservation Districts got a reload of their normal $500,000 a year grant funding, but they also had $3 million plugged into a loan program. They've been working off the same $125,000 loan pot that they were given back in 1962. They couldn't charge interest on their loans until about 20 years ago. They could loan you money to buy a bag of seed, and that was about it. So they've got some real money right now, so your conservation districts might have access to a little more money. And then some of the funds, additional funds went to school and public lands and game fish and parks for dam repair at various facilities around the state. School and public lands, 6.5, game and fish, 5.6 million. There's some money going into redoing Capitol Lake. They aren't going to try and relight the fire, but God knows they want to try. And then finally, we're going to get a new state health lab from that end, which is probably a very good deal. So, by and large, legislatively, it was a very good year for water out in Pierre. Again, it took a long time. 62 was one of the last bills to actually pass and land on the governor's desk, because it just took forever for them to get comfortable with what was going on. As the comfort level came along and the bill progressed, then everybody was on board. In fact, there was only a single no vote for the bill at any point during its journey through the legislature. Representative Haugard was a nay vote, just for fun, I think, in appropriations. But when it came to the floor, he voted for it, so that all worked out well. So once they got on board, then it's working out really well. And with that, that's water in the legislature this year. There's an awful lot of it out there. As I said, the bulk of it is geared toward, and I think really should go toward, the water and wastewater infrastructure. But the department really, really wanted to use some of the money for a project that they had, that Secretary Roberts had cooked up. And so they opened the door to non-point source activities, which is a toehold. It's a foot in the door that is already being kicked open and taken advantage of by others. And it's certainly something that might be an option out here as well. That's a big umbrella of activities that could fit, particularly as more money comes back and is returned. There's a drop dead date on the funding. It all has to be allocated by the end of December of 24 and spent by the end of December of 26. And so every day that passes and somebody doesn't spend some of the money, the clock doesn't care, it keeps ticking. So if there are projects, that show up a year from now that really could use the money and spend the money, they may find themselves getting an opportunity to get the money just because everybody else has turned it back. So anyway, that's the legislative update.
Any questions?
Happy to answer any questions or make up a story or something. Okay. Well, think of ways to spend money. Because there's a lot of it there, and there's going to be a lot of it a year from now.
Thank you. Thank you, Jake. All right, moving right along, our next invited talk is from Glenn Kane with the Ellsworth Development Authority, and he's going to give us an update on the Ellsworth Air Force Base pipeline project that will serve some of the residents out around Ellsworth Air Force Base that have issues with groundwater contamination from the base. Glenn?
Thank you. Bombs on target. No, I'm not in the wrong meeting. That's the mission of Ellsworth Air Force Base. Our mission is to make sure they do their we built a wastewater treatment plant. We own and operate the wastewater treatment plant that treats the water for Ellsworth Air Force Base. We've purchased thousands of acres around the base to make sure that they can fly their training missions. We're currently building a rec center so that they can train in all elements. And now a water project. Imagine for a moment that you contaminated your neighbor's well, not through any fault of your own. You bought a product, used the product as it was intended to be used, and you contaminated the neighbor's well. What would you do? Would you buy them drinking water? Would you put filtration systems in their homes? Would you put a long-term project together to provide them free water? Well, that's what the base has done. This was about a little over 3 years ago, I believe, when this topic of PFAS, the product that was part of the firefighting foam, had contaminated the shallow wells around Ellsworth Air Force Base. They immediately took action to get drinking water to those people and filtering systems, and then now looking at a long-term project. There was a lot of meetings with stakeholders that could possibly help with this project. Rapid City, Box Elder, Corps of Engineers, all looked at the project. And the idea of what the Air Force can do with their money and the process from those just couldn't mesh. The Air Force has restrictions on their money, and their money says we can't pay for maintenance and we can't pay for operations. Pretty hard to run a water project if you don't have maintenance and operations. So after those entities and the Air Force could not come to terms, and we paid very close attention to what was being said, what the problems were, what the issues were. After we worked with the Air Force for about, probably 6-8 months back and forth, we came to the conclusion that we would do a study. They contracted the authority to do a study to see if we could do a water project that could solve this problem. We're about 75% of the way through that project. With the engineering, the feasibility of is this something that's really going to work? By the 1st of September, we hope to have that complete. It has to be complete. No hope. We have to be complete. We'll turn that over to the Air Force.
This the ACD meetings? Water meeting.
Water meeting.
Okay, wrong one.
We'll turn that into the Air Force. They want to appropriate their funding yet this fiscal year. The fiscal year of the federal government runs till October. So they'll want to get this in this fiscal year's project. If you see the map that I handed around, if everybody got one, I don't know if I had enough. It gives the location of what we're looking at, lots of different reasons why it is what it is. The water source, the topography, the idea that we need customers to pay for the water. Box Elder will be, our idea will be a bulk water supplier, not every individual. There'll be, hopefully there'll be some water districts or things developed in those areas that are unincorporated. Box Elder has already indicated their need to us, so they would be one of the major water customers on this. The PFAS portion of this, the people that are contaminated, is relatively small. There's only about probably 60 gallons a minute required to service those people. We would take it to Box Elder, wheel through Box Elder's system, and then go to the southeast and continue forward if we need to keep. There's no doubt that there's going to be more of these PFAS properties pop up if we continue to test. So we have to be prepared to continue if we need to. So that's kind of where we started. Where we're at now is in that design phase, feasibility study, and then the idea would be we would have that money used up. We would expend the funds, have the project done in 2 years. So by January of 25, we would have this project done. If everybody buys off in October, we present this to the Air Force and their funding. There are some other upsizing portions of this project that we will do just based on the fact that the Air Force can only pay for certain things. So we're working with DANR on those things. So the hope is by 2025 there's water flowing through this and we can solve this PFAS problem for the Air Force. Any questions?
When are you going to actually start construction?
The hope would be we'd start by January of this next year at the latest. So 2 years from now, we're looking January 25 to complete. It's a pretty monumental task. There's about 14 miles of water line. So, the well has not been drilled. It's been spot located. We've applied for the permit.
That's Madison well.
The Madison well. The yellow part you see around there is where they said the sweet spot was for the well location. That's why we're out there where we are. How deep? We've been told that it could be anywhere from 600 to 1,000 feet. The estimated production is somewhere between 600 and 1,000. Pretty big range, but that's a lot of water.
I see you have New Underwood circled there. Have they been involved in the talks of getting water possibly from this project?
We have not taken it clear to New Underwood as far as talks with them.
Okay.
But it is part of the discussions with the Air Force is this may continue further down the line. There's also talks that the PFAS requirements are going to start being lowered by the EPA. So we're going to have more contamination, not less. So I expect a tsunami pretty soon of those to come. soon as those new EPA guidelines come out.
Any more questions for Glenn?
Has there been any discussion yet with Rapid Valley Sanitation District as far as potential use of water?
Yes, we've had a number of conversations with Rapid Valley, Rapid City, as far as the regional perspective of trying to tie all this into a loop system. I know because of those conversations, Box Elder's working with Rapid City and Rapid Valley for source water too. So Box Elder's looking for a lot of different places for source water. And if we can get water to them from this system, from Rapid Valley and from Rapid City, it would probably solve Box Elder's water issues for a long time.
All right, thanks. Okay, moving along. The next presentation is for the Western Dakota Regional Water System, and just to give us an update on that project, Cheryl Chapman is here to do that.
Yes.
Thanks for coming.
Thank you so much, Dan, and for having me today. And so good to see so many people here. Thank you, Jay, for your legislative update. I think I remember when the state budget was $600 million. So it is really a phenomenal investment in infrastructure for our state. And for those of us who are engineers and scientists, that we know that investments in infrastructure are always the first step to really improving our quality of life. And also for Glenn and South Dakota Ellsworth Development Authority, who have worked tirelessly to make sure that Ellsworth Air Force Base remains one of the premier bases in our country. And so thank you for all those efforts over time as well. And earlier, Dan Driscoll, to keep all of our Dans straight, talked about how important partnerships are for these projects. And that is really sums up a lot of what success will look like for a proposed water line to bring additional water to western South Dakota. Over the last couple of years, we've worked closely with DANR and Secretary Roberts. The grant that you heard about from Jay has been an essential element in helping us get underway to really study a proposed project such as this. We kind of just going around the table a little bit, we know in working with counties, and Pennington County in particular will be critical. We've learned that there are as many as 350 small users in many of the Black Hills counties, and it's the few meetings that I've been at recently, there's always somebody who comes and talks about water and how they need water for their subdivisions, for their homes, and that sort of thing. And so planning together and thinking about that will be critical. And USGS, really a partner in many ways, but especially technical expertise. We'll talk a little bit about NEPA for a moment, but affected environment, what is the lay of the land in terms of resources, and how will those resources be impacted? Who better than USGS and the scientific studies that are available there? And South Dakota Mines has been critical in helping us get underway as well. And why not use major projects such as this as a way to give opportunities for students to really understand how to work on and lead multidisciplinary projects. What a great education. And Bureau of Reclamation will become a major partner. Danny Fettig up in Bismarck heads up rural water from Bureau of Reclamation. I might add a South Dakota Mines graduate as well. And you know, very early discussions have been important because we really seek to marry up some of the state funding with what BOR will require so that instead of doing projects in series, if you will, we can do them in parallel and move them along a little faster. And then, of course, cities, City of Rapid City, many other communities in our area have been and will continue to be essential partners in moving along. And if you go to the next slide, Dan, last but not least, West Dakota Water Development District has been the catalyst of this idea. As many of you know, future use water permits in the state of South Dakota must be renewed on a 7-year basis. And the last time that West Dakota's 10,000 acre feet per year future use water permit was renewed, they asked South Dakota Mines to do a study for them on the need for that permit, and was reported back in December of 2019 that yes, you should renew that permit, and yes, you should look for ways in which to build infrastructure to bring that water to western South Dakota. Now, we'll be the first to note that there's a lot more study that needs to go beyond, but part of what they came back with, and next slide, Dan, if you may, really kind of set West Dakota on the path to say, let's learn more. Let's find out if water systems, communities, tribes in western South Dakota would be interested in looking at this problem together. And if you can see on this particular chart out of the South Dakota Mines report, you'll see a black inclined line. The solid black shows existing use or past use and demand for water. The dashed line is projected, and then a kind of a cone of uncertainty, if you will, around that. We think, because this is already 4 years old, that use demand kind of leans toward the left there and is higher and faster than what was anticipated. The middle horizontal line, the green line in the middle, is average precipitation or average availability of water, surface water and groundwater. The blue line at the top is during very wet years, and the red line, though, at the bottom is during prolonged drought. And what you can see is that in the year 2020, the use actually would have exceeded the available water had we been in the middle of the prolonged drought. And it was this summary, this conclusion, that really put West Dakota Water Development District into motion to take a look at this a little bit more in depth. And this particular report, next slide, Dan, really mirrored in part a study that was done 25 years ago with the Black Hills hydrology study. And the numbers might be a little hard to read, but it shows that on average, again, the recharge to the aquifer is well in excess of what the demand on that aquifer is. However, during periods of prolonged drought, and in particular 1936, the amount of recharge to the aquifer was approximately a third of what was being used. And fortunately, back then there weren't a lot of people using it. But had the population been what it is today, there would have been a shortage. And so what was done for West Dakota Water Development District and what was shown in USGS does show instances where shortages may occur. And as you all know, communities throughout western South Dakota, by and large, rely on surface water and groundwater for their source water for their people. Next slide. Mines also wanted to give West Dakota a rough idea of what these projects would cost. They took a look at a 3-foot diameter line, which would deliver 10,000 acre feet a year, and also a 6-foot diameter line, delivering about 76,000 acre feet per year. The cost difference then for the smaller line was about $500 million and close to $2 billion for the larger diameter line. And again, this study is already aging, and we all know what has happened to construction prices over the last few years. And so we anticipate much higher costs, and of course we really don't know at this point in time what size of system would be required. And so with this information in mind, West Dakota Water Development District, and next slide, Dan, in early 2020, turned to Banner Associates and said, can you help us explore the possibility of interest throughout western South Dakota in looking at how we can get more water to our part of the state? And the first part, and I might add that I think that contract was signed in March of 2020, just as COVID got started. And so ideas about gatherings such as this or other meetings kind of went by the wayside, and we did a lot of it by old-fashioned getting on the phone to see if people would come to Zoom meetings, which was kind of a new thing back at that point in time. So kind of the initial step was just calling places and finding out if there was interest. And almost without exception, we had one water system that said, we just started, I think we're good for a while, but incidentally has since come on board to be part of our group. And so it was just to see if there was, first of all, interest in coming together and learning about where we are as a group. And it was a resounding yes then. And so in the fall of 2020, we scheduled 4 Zoom meetings once a month to just educate ourselves about what the South Dakota Mine Study was, what East Dakota did, what Lewis and Clark did, and other projects. We learned from DANR, Bureau of Reclamation, Rural Development, what funding sources there might be. And we looked at stories from people who headed up Lewis and Clark, Minnie-Wachoni, and other systems to give us perspective on what would lay ahead if we were to move in the direction of a project. And with that came a next steps recommendation. And next slide, if you would, Dan. 3 recommendations. And by the way, Dana, are you giving out your remainder studies, or?
The first one?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, those are available.
So the study that came out then in December of 2020 with these recommendations, there's some hard copies and on your website as well, was a 3-part recommendation. 1, create a governing structure that could manage and take this idea and project going forward. And it was a recommendation of a nonprofit. West Dakota said, we're not in the business of managing large water projects. So there was encouragement to move in that direction. The second recommendation was do a little bit more study. How much water are we talking about? How many people need water? And finally, a discussion on funding. Start looking for money. And I might add that at that point in time, we had no idea that ARPA funds were coming. And so kind of the traditional thinking was, well, we should be ready to get on the state water plan in about 2 years and so forth. But things have moved much more quickly. Next slide. So picking up the baton on the governance, the board passed another contract to say, please go ahead and do more work on the technical evaluation, but also see if you can go ahead and form a nonprofit corporation to get underway. And it's hard to believe, but it was about this time just a year ago that all of the communities that had shown interest came together to just say, are we willing to form a nonprofit corporation to get underway? And so in the summer of 2021, that group met and officially was incorporated at the end of September 2021. Again, a nonprofit. Membership can be tribes, communities, rural water systems, and it's at the time, and in our bylaws now, is one entity, one vote. The board, however, I would add right now, is underway with discussions on the right definition for membership for Western South Dakota. We have all of these very small users, and technically almost 350 throughout the Black Hills. And so the notion of one entity, one vote, of a system serving 25 homes versus the city of Rapid City having the same vote isn't quite where we need to be. So the board is kind of wrestling with that right now and looking at bringing a recommendation to the annual meeting, which will be either at the very end of November or early December this year. The group ultimately decided on the name Western Dakota Regional Water System. It's still a mouthful of words. The board has sought another name, preferably a Lakota name, but we could not land on one. And there was a consensus that Minnie-Wauchoni had really taken one of the best names possible. Minnie-Wauchoni, water is life. And there are minimal dues right now. That may not always be the case, but we're asking for $500 a year, and in part to say, yeah, we'll put down an ante, so to speak, to say, keep us in the conversation, keep us at the table to move along. Next slide. Just this particular chart shows the board of directors that was elected at the first annual meeting. Dale Tech is president, who's also Public Works Director for Rapid City. Doug Curry, Public Works, Box Elder. Mayor Teresa Hall, New Underwood. Jake Fitzgerald, Manager of West River Lyman Jones, that's out of Murdo. Daryl Hernandez, Legislative Liaison for Oglala Sioux Tribe. And Chuck Jacobs, Director of the Oglala Sioux Tribe Water Maintenance System, and also on the Board of Directors of Minnie-Wauchoni. Next slide. The second recommendation in that 2020 report was to do some additional study. And again, Dan, if I may, you've got a few copies of that report also on the website. And one of the major findings in that water use study that came out October 1st, 2021, was that out of a series of questionnaires that was sent out, there's a request for around 50 million gallons per day. Based on the entire service area, however, it's almost double that if everyone would want to be part of the system. So that kind of just gives you an idea of the interest and demand out there. One of the things that the board of directors did as it first began to meet was to say we needed an engineering team to help us along this path and to really begin to study this issue, apply for funds, and so forth. And so in November, put out a statement of interest and then a request for proposal also in December of 21. In January, interviews were held and the board made a selection in February of 2022. The selected team included AE2S, KLJ, and Black and Veatch. And this process was done in such a way to meet all the requirements for ultimately having federal procurement as we went along. In terms of funding, again, when we first made that recommendation, it was not realized how much funding would be on its way. But last fall, we realized that the legislature would be dealing with how to spend this money. And so an extra effort was put into place to make an application and submit it shortly after incorporation to get on the state water plan. We were approved a little more than a month later, and then we're part of the discussion of that $600 million that was ultimately approved by the South Dakota legislature earlier this year. Ultimately, an application was made and $8 million was approved by the State Water Board in mid-April. In the future, the Western Dakota Regional Water System also sees federal funds, member dues, although those will be quite minor, and then the SWARMS money that is also available through DANR. Some of the key next steps will be looking at a Bureau of Reclamation appraisal study and ultimately a feasibility study. Those will both need to be congressionally authorized for Bureau of Reclamation to spend money and efforts to move in that direction. Right as a companion activity with all of that is being able to canvass Western South Dakota for current and future use of water. How much will be required? And part of that canvassing effort is just getting underway. In fact, I had the opportunity to be in Bison last Thursday night to talk with Perkins County about possibility of water from a project such as this. Wrapped around all of this, however, is the National Environmental Policy Act, or NEPA, as many of you are familiar with. Although the project has not really gotten underway, it is the intent of the board to do a lot of initial outreach that would typically be part of a NEPA process, to be able to say that the process is as key and critical to success of this as just getting the paperwork done. Ultimately, NEPA is what is called a procedural law, that it's important to go through the steps appropriately as it is as to what the outcome is and effect on the environment. A big part of that is understanding the affected environment. I mentioned that a little earlier. Part of what we really have to make sure we understand is the quality and quantity of water in our aquifers throughout Western South Dakota, as well as surface waters, and then to understand what happens with the projected demand for water within all of this. I would add that when the board passed its bylaws, it made the decision that no water from this project would be used for mining. And that mirrored what the bylaws were for Mini-Wachoni. And so I wanted to add that because that's been an issue and a topic that's come up in some of our community conversations right now. The other big part to keep in mind is the alternatives part of NEPA. The first aspect of that is to make sure there is a wide-ranging number of alternatives that cover all the possibilities. And one of them to keep in mind is a no-action alternative. What happens to the people, to the environment, if this project does not happen? And as we know, we have continued growth and demand on our aquifers. And so that will be a very interesting analysis, of course. And once the alternatives are laid out, then each of them are analyzed on the affected environment to fully understand both the human and the natural impacts to our resources. And so that's a lot of work to be coming up. One of our team members said, you know, once all of this is very difficult work, designing a pipe size and location is about the easiest thing we have to do on a project of this size. Next slide. We've had many communities participate and indicate interest. Elevate Black Hills has been a good partner in providing space for us. South Dakota Mines has been helping us, especially the foundation, and their work was in managing a small grant from South Dakota Community Foundation for early organizational purposes. And I think that's it, Dan. All right.
Any questions for Cheryl? Comments, questions?
I've got one for you, Cheryl.
Sure.
I mean, I understand all the engineering of this. What effort, if anything, is going to be made from the planning perspective on how communities are going to deal with this water and the growth it will stimulate and the new directions you can take those? Or is your organization just going to dump the water on these communities and let them deal with that itself? Or do you intend to have a component to help that along?
So did you all hear the question about just how communities will deal with the growth aspects that may occur with additional water sources? And that again gets back to NEPA, because one of the requirements in the National Environmental Policy Act is to look at the socioeconomic impacts of projects, not only a direct impact, but perhaps indirect impacts that could occur. And so communities will be involved. There are required public meetings for all of that, analysis of that growth. But we also see that there's probably some projects that will happen in tandem. Bureau of Reclamation is the federal agency that largely manages large water projects. There's other agencies that help with projects, and like USDA Rural Development. And so they in turn might be working with small communities to say, oh, we need a new water tower, or our water distribution system is 60 years old, we need a new one, and that'll come hand in glove with a new project, if that community decides to take water. It ultimately is a community's choice as we move ahead.
I kind of see this as a cart before the horse project, where we're putting the water in, which will stimulate the growth, rather than the communities figuring out what growth they want to have, and then going after the resources to make that happen. You know, as you correctly note, water is going to be a stimulus for growth, and how that growth happens and whether it's a good thing or a bad thing is always up in the air.
Well, you know, it's an interesting question, because one of the reasons that this group got a grant was not because of future water needs, but because water's needed now. And so if we were only based on future water needs, we would not have gotten that grant. So there's a recognition that there's current needs, and then happening already all around us are other growth issues.
Well, I congratulate you. You've done an amazing amount of work in a very short period of time.
You know, thank you, Scott. It is amazing to see how this has come together. I attribute it to really almost a grassroots approach to it, because there's no federal group or state group saying, you must do this. You know, it's been, thanks to, again, West Dakota, it's been people coming forward saying, I'd like to be part of this. And what we're really encouraging communities as we talk to them is come to the table now and talk about what your possible needs are. At the end of the day, you may not sign up, so to speak, you know, but it's very hard to come later after a project is planned and say, oh, I changed my mind, I'd like to get some water. And we've seen that happen, I might add, at like Lewis and Clark, for example. There are communities who didn't think they needed it and are wishing otherwise right now as they've gone ahead.
Glenn, did you have a question?
Yes.
Oh, yeah.
The lion's share of the water rights belongs to Rapid City.
That is correct.
So you kind of talked about one vote, one member. How is this all playing out as far as where the water would go when it gets out of here?
Well, all to be determined. But as the communities have come together, that has been a concept that everybody has felt comfortable with. It's not our idea, frankly. It came from Lewis and Clark. Whether you're the city of Sioux Falls or the city of Madison, one member, one vote. Now, we do have this interesting situation out here, though, of all these very small water users, which we're trying to grapple with right now. But that is the scenario that is working right now.
I got a question.
Okay.
On the $8 million that they got the grant for, what specifically is that money going to be used for? What fund for funding?
Yes, it's for early project funding and some of the environmental work. And we've had great conversations with Bureau of Rec also. It's very important to us to not waste time or duplicate efforts. And so as we look at potential progress and alignments and things like that, we'll be working closely with them to do that work at the same time.
Okay, thanks. Was there any?
I think I saw
Jay?
Jay.
Yeah, I'm just going to offer a comment in part to Scott's question, or about cart before the horse, and certainly there's something to that. At the same time, I would note, reference made to Lewis and Clark, that was a concept that predated my arrival in South Dakota 38 and a half years ago. It's still not completed. The process, the sooner the process starts, the better. There will be weeding. There were at one point
60 now.
60 plus members of Lewis and Clark. It's down to 20, partly because people looked at what the bill was going to be. And so it's not like this is going to be free water that will drive uncontrolled growth. The water is going to come at a cost. For Lewis and Clark, the model, 80% federal, 10% state, 10% members. That is not a trivial contribution. And so, communities aren't going to be just, oh yeah, I got that, we'll just take whatever. It's not a simple, but it's not quick. Like I said, they had until 2012 to kind of get water delivered. They met that delivery date, but we're 10 years past that, and they're still going to finish up maybe in 2 years' time with the original system, and there's already talk of the second pipe.
Yeah.
Thank you. Any more questions for Cheryl? Okay, thanks, Cheryl.
Thank you so much.
Half hour to our break. We already covered legislative. We crossed that off because it was duplication. So the next item is to hear from South Dakota DANR regarding the ongoing Black Hills Rotating Basins project, and Jesse Wilkins is going to present that for the DANR.
Hi everyone, I'm Jesse Wilkins. I'm in the Watershed Protection Program at South Dakota DANR. One of the things that I do, I transferred out here to Rapid City last spring, and part of the purpose of that is to help implement this rotating basin project out here. I specialize in water quality monitoring. I run the state lake monitoring program and the state volunteer monitoring program, so monitoring is kind of my thing. It's what I do. And this project is really focused on collecting data in this region. Can you go to the next slide, please? So let's start with what is rotating basins. We came up with this idea to supplement our existing routine water quality monitoring programs. Like we have our routine stream monitoring program, that's the Water Quality Monitoring Network. That collects a ton of data for us, and the statewide lake assessment program. And while those supply a lot of data, it doesn't quite meet our needs in terms of being able to assess all water bodies in the state, which is one thing that we're tasked with under the Clean Water Act. And so we try to do the best that we can. Rotating basin is, we broke the state into 5 basins, as you can see on the map there. And we spend 2 years in each basin sampling intensively every water body that we possibly can, that we have the manpower and the funding to monitor. And so we created this in 2019, and we started working with East Dakota in the Big Sioux Basin with Jay's outfit, and sampled, I don't know, 30-ish lakes, 40, 50 stream sites, something like that, maybe more. It was a lot.
6 lakes, 42 stream sites.
Sure. And so we ran a pilot project for it in 2019 just to see how it would go. It went extremely well. So in 2020 and 2021, we went full bore and we sampled all those water bodies. And then now for 2022, we're moving out here, the second part of the rotation, and that's on the far left on the map there in the kind of light green. And out here, we'll be sampling that region intensively. And the idea is to collect data for water quality assessments. Would you go to the next slide, please? Oh, and one thing I forgot to mention, over the course of 10 years, we'll cover every basin in the state. And then the idea is to then start right over again and just keep going. The reason that we collect this data, at least for DANR's perspective, the main reason for us, is to do 303D assessments. And these are required under the Clean Water Act. And what they tell us is whether or not a water body is meeting its water quality standards. In order to make those assessments, we need water quality data. So there's minimum data requirements for these assessments, and they're quite minimal. For streams, 20 samples over the course of 5 years. And for lakes, you have to sample like 2 out of the last 10 years, and within those 2 years, you have to visit it twice and collect 2 samples. So they're not very stringent, but yet we're still not quite able to meet them for many water bodies. And so that's kind of the purpose of all this. And so far what we've seen in the Big Sioux Basin is we are able to assess way more water bodies when we have this supplemental data. These 303D assessments come out in the document that we put out every 2 years called the Integrated Report for Surface Water Quality in South Dakota. We just released our most latest version in April, and there's a link up there on the slide. And we release one every 2 years. There'll be another one in 2024 that will include the data from the sampling that we're doing in the Black Hills region now. So that's really the purpose for us for collecting this data. I mean, alongside all the other purposes for collecting water quality data, like assessing the risks to human health and ecological aspects and things like that. Next slide, please. So the work that we're doing is, it includes stream sampling. We have 66 stream sites throughout the Black Hills and the prairie around the hills. We're sampling for E. coli, total dissolved solids, which would be minerals and ions dissolved in the water, total suspended solids, so think sediment, alkalinity, so resistance to pH changes, nitrate, nitrite, ammonia, total Kjeldahl nitrogen, which is nitrogen in an organic form, and total phosphorus. Those are nutrients that drive algae blooms, and they're plant nutrients, so they make things grow. Then we also looked at dissolved oxygen pH, specific conductance, which is the water's ability to conduct electricity. It's very closely related to total dissolved solids because ions are required to conduct electricity. And then we also look at the water temperature, which has been an issue throughout the hills in some streams like Spring Creek, where we're trying to maintain cold water temperatures for trout fisheries. And then in some locations, they're all on the prairie, we're looking at the sodium adsorption ratio, which is caused by high salinity soils, and it can create impairments in terms of irrigation, for irrigation water supplies. So we're sampling that on a select number of sites. Next slide, please. This map, the dots are kind of small, but those are all of our stream sampling sites. There's some kind of in the middle in green there. Those are within the West Dakota district boundary. There's 17 of them. West Dakota generously provided funding to cover the lab analysis costs for all of those sites. Then there are another 49 sites outside the district boundary that DANR is covering the funding for. We would sample each site monthly through the growing season, so May to September. And over the 2 years, we would collect 10 samples at each site. And then we intend, once the rotating basin project is done out here, our staff in the Rapid City office would continue to monitor a large number of these sites, at least enough to meet those minimum data requirements for the 303D assessments. In total, at the end of the project, we will have collected 660 stream samples, along with another 132 QA/QC samples, which are duplicate samples and blank samples where you fill a bottle with deionized or distilled water for the purpose of testing our own accuracy and precision as well as the laboratories. That will result in 792 total stream samples. Next slide, please. We're also sampling 26 lakes. The parameters are pretty much identical to our stream sites, with one addition that we will do on an as-needed basis, which is microcystin. It's an algal toxin produced by blue-green algae. This isn't that much of an issue out here. We have some lakes out here that get pretty green and can produce algal toxins. It's much more of an issue in eastern South Dakota, when we did the rotating basin with East Dakota, we did routine monitoring for microcystin and other algal toxins. Because it's less prevalent out here, we'll do it on an as-needed basis. So we'll have the supplies with us where if we get to a lake and it's green with a substantial algae bloom, then we'll collect a sample for microcystin. But otherwise, when the water's clear and you can't see algae, it's pretty much always a zero for microcystin and other algal toxins. So, next slide, please. This map shows our lake sites. Again, they're quite hard to see, but the green dots in the middle, there's 6 lakes within the West Dakota district boundary that they're covering the cost of samples, and another 20 lakes outside the boundary. We'll sample each lake 3 times a summer, between May and September, but we really try to stick towards the warmer time of the summer. So we started lake sampling the last week of May, and we'll try to wrap it up by the 1st or 2nd week of September. So the 2-year goal then is 6 samples per lake. That kind of gives us an idea of changes across the growing season too. You like to sample it, to capture those seasonal changes, especially with algae blooms and other things that grow. They're kind of boom and bust. You'll catch them sometimes, but not others. So the more frequently you sample, the better of an idea you get of the water quality of that lake. In the end, we'll have 156 lake samples, another 31 of those QA/QC samples for 187 total lake samples. Next slide, please. This is progress as of today. We were out sampling yesterday, and we'll be back out sampling tomorrow. So far, we've been to 15 lakes. We have 11 to be sampled by the end of June. And we sampled all 66 streams for our May visit. We did get into June 1st and June 2nd a little bit as we were waiting on our own agency to sign our MOU, but we got that taken care of. And so far for June, we have 56 stream sites sampled and another 10 to go. Next slide, please. I can't really give you any results yet. I have a little bit of data back from the lab, but it's pretty much 1 sample per stream site, which 1 sample on any water body doesn't really tell you much, which is kind of the purpose of those minimum data requirements in the 303D assessment. So my plan is to come back in the fall when I actually have some data to show you. Also, the data wasn't really in a format that I could work with yet as I get it from the lab. But again, I think I would just be painting a false picture of any results that we had, because 1 sample is at high or low that day. That's why we need more data. Ideally, I'd like to have at least 20 samples before I say anything about anything. So, but as the results become available, I'll be uploading them onto our our water quality data portal. There's the link right there. And probably about once a month I'll be uploading them. I usually request the data from the lab once a month. And then I have to review and approve that data and make sure that there's no typos or there's nothing that's just wildly unbelievable, like a pH of 100 or something like that. And I'll put those up there as they become available. Next slide, please. And that's pretty much all I got. If you have any questions, my contact info is up there. We'll be at Pactola and Deerfield tomorrow. And as always, we're always running around sampling all the streams. Does anybody have any questions?
Sure. Do you have maybe I missed the test for man-made chemicals or anything?
Well,
what was the question?
Do we test for any man-made chemicals? And some of those, yes, are man-made. I mean, a lot of them are, in origin, are man-made. You know, some of the E. coli comes from humans, but a lot of it comes from agricultural runoff. So in a way, I don't know if you call it man-made or not. But if we were here, it would be there. We don't test for mining stuff. A lot of people ask about that. The Surface Water Quality Program at DANR handles most mining stuff, and they have projects in place that are specifically focused on mine monitoring. It's not something that the Watershed Protection Program really dabbles in. As far as a lot of the nutrients like nitrogen and phosphorus, we have natural background levels of those, but they're often exacerbated due to human activity. So some of them are natural in origin. A lot of them have a natural component and then an anthropogenic component on top of that. So it's kind of yes and no, or both at the same time.
My main thing is PFAS people of those type of chemicals will be tested.
No, we haven't got into that yet. I imagine it's something that will probably happen in the future as it becomes more and more common in the public eye.
Jesse,
yes,
on that, there are about 80 public water supplies in the state that will start testing for PFAS and PFOA in 2023.
Okay. Is that
it's not related to this project, but
okay.
to the EPA request.
That's good.
It's coming down. That work will get started next year.
Cool.
Jesse?
Yes.
Could you submit a QA/QC summary as your final report?
Absolutely. That's something that we do anyway, yeah. Okay. QA/QC is a really important part of what we do to make sure that our results are defensible, accurate, precise. So not just us, but the lab as well. So yeah, that I can definitely do that. I'll be doing an analysis of our QA/QC efforts and looking at, we do the duplicate samples to those should be within 20% relative percent difference. And then what we call the blank samples, where we fill the bottle up with distilled or deionized water and send it into the lab, they should never detect anything. And if they do, then we do corrections. So yeah, I'd be happy to provide any results on that. Yeah, Jay?
I asked you this question yesterday, I think.
Yeah, you did.
You had a chance to think about it. We're going to hear in a little bit about aquatic invasive species efforts out here. Are there, as part of the rotating basins process, are you looking for AIS? Aggressive, I mean, that was you're not looking for it, but if you see it?
Absolutely, if we see it. It's not something that we're there to do. Because, as you know, 66 stream sites, 26 lakes, we got our hands full the way that it is. So, but if we see things, absolutely, we would be the first thing that we do is to report them. So yeah, if we see some zebra mussels at Pactola, yeah, we're gonna give GF&P a call, and we're gonna make that known. I wish that we had the time to actually look for them, but we don't. The main focus is we just try not to spread them and make it any worse than it is. So we follow decontamination procedures, and we let our boat dry out after we sample an infested lake. We pull our plug, we lower our motor to get the water out of the lower unit. So that's the main focus. And if we see it, yeah, absolutely. But that's not what we're there to do. So we focus on the monitoring.
How many impacted water bodies do you have in the Black Hills region?
I don't think that I could answer that with a number. I mean, I know what Angostura has quagga mussels, Sheridan has some carp, and do they have curly leaf pondweed? They have one of the plants, I think, I can't remember. But I can't tell you a number, not to mention the dynamo in the streams.
Caleb?
Yes.
Thanks for the presentation, Jessica. Is this program in addition to the regular WQM network, or does it kind of replace it, or does that kind of, do the WQM sites continue on the normal schedule while they're doing this 2-year phase also?
Great question, thank you. Yeah, the WQM sites will continue as normal. A lot of our WQMs are quarterly sites that we sample 4 times a year. So we hit that minimum data requirement of 20 samples over 5 years. But we often run into issues with that. Like, there's a good example on the Belfouche River where every April we collect a sample there, and every time it exceeds the total suspended solid standard, which results in the Belfouche segment there being impaired for total suspended solids. But if you model it as if you had collected a sample every day based on the relationship between TSS and the flow record, it probably shouldn't be listed as impaired. So we're introducing some bias with our monitoring design there. So yeah, we put this on top of it to supplement that data to fill out that picture a little bit more and get a much clearer idea. In terms of the lakes, though, the answer there is no. Like right now, we are not sampling lakes like twice. Like, we have our statewide lake assessment program, but that's being conducted everywhere but where we're doing rotating basins, because it doesn't really make any sense for us to go to a lake and then we're just duplicating the effort. It's kind of different than streams. So yeah, it's supplementing that existing data from the WQM network to kind of
some of those run sites have additional parameters. I know like Whitewood Creek does because they've got some minor effects, but I think all the other streams are kind of, they're already just using the same list, right? Or they're a little more.
Pretty much. I don't know. I can't speak too much on that because I don't look at some of the nuts and bolts of the WQM monitoring that much. Because in our program we're mostly looking at E. coli and TSS and nutrients. I do know that on some they have other specific parameters that they sample, but I don't know all of them.
Well, if I may, can I add?
Yes, you would know.
Yeah, well, back in the day when I was there, yes, a lot of the northern hill streams like Spearfish Creek, Upper Rapid Creek, and definitely Whitewood Creek, metals were analyzed every month, all the heavy metals.
Does anybody else have? Yeah, Dan.
Would there be any opportunity for other entities to collaborate or expand slightly? For instance, Glenn had asked, you sample anything like PFAS, and like, could it be possible if you've got a site or two on Box Elder Creek that you could add that if someone else would pick up the analytical costs and the like?
Probably. It's a question I probably have to run by my managers, but I mean, we're kind of already doing that with the sodium absorption ratio ourselves, so I don't see that there would be any problem with it. I don't want to speak for my managers.
Right, I mean within realistic limits and the like.
Yeah, but I mean, if we're already there and it's not particularly time consuming, I wouldn't see it being a problem.
Game and Fish had a lake of particular interest, perhaps you could add a lake or two, not 20 lakes.
Right, well, there really isn't a lake left.
You got them all.
We pretty much got every single one. I mean, like up in the Northeast when we worked in the Big Sioux, there's a lot of smaller lakes there, shallower lakes, but they're productive fisheries, so they're places that we'd want to collect data. But, Jay's staff only has so many hours in a week and so many people, same as us, so some of them fall by the wayside. But out here, I mean, I added a bunch in, actually, like Roe Bay wasn't on our initial list, or Cox's Lake, or Bear Butte Lake wasn't on there. I added those all in. I think the only one that we're missing is Lake Mitchell, which I've heard argument in our department of whether you should call it a lake or not. Is it a storm retention pond, or is it a lake? I see people fishing there, so I lean towards a lake personally myself, and it's a water body, but I think that's probably the only one of more than an acre or two that's not like a pond that we're not sampling. So, any other questions?
All right, Jesse, thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. You got 7 minutes, John. Next item is the Game Fish and Parks are going to give us an update on the invasive aquatic species that the dredging program they have here in the Black Hills. John Carrero with the Game Fish and Parks.
There's no deadline.
There's no deadline?
No deadline.
Thanks, Dan. And Dan Driscoll actually touched on some of the projects we've been involved together with, and then I'll cover a few of the other ones too as well. But they talk about AIS. You asked about it. Curly leaf pondweed is our main, plant that we have invasive. On our website, it kind of lists every lake that you can find it in. We have European rudd and some other things, but the biggest thing we were concerned with were zebra mussels. And that was a big push over the last couple of years with the BOR grant, which was about $300,000, which basically it worked out really well for us because we got the conservation districts involved, and instead of us having 25 interns running around to lakes, which is kind of tough to manage all of those, the districts are handling that. They do the hiring. We reimburse them with the funds after the month is completed. So it's worked out real well. So Angostura, Shade Hill, Pectola, Deerfield, Sheridan are covered, and then we're out in other lakes also. So that grant has purchased basically about 12 disinfection units. So the staff is basically sitting at boat ramps, for hours on end. It's not a glamorous job, but they do a really good job, and it's stopped a number of things. I mean, we haven't come across zebra mussels, which is what we're trying to prevent from moving across the state, like it has on the east side of the state. But there have been a number of disinfections we have done. I think there are, I should have brought the data, but thousands of contacts and inspections. And the main thing is it's still education. I mean, that's everything involved with the program. But it's been successful. So we have not seen zebra mussels out here yet, and hopefully that continues. Also, there's the Fish and Wildlife Service grant that will cover another year after we're out of the BOR funds, plus some of the funds from West Dakota, which is a benefit also. So, any questions on that program at all? Yes.
So, one of the reasons for monitoring this and trying to stop the spread is to give you some time to develop methods to deal with it once places become infested, right?
Yeah, and it's really difficult to deal with. The biggest thing is trying to prevent it from going to any other lake once it is found in one. I mean, that's the biggest thing. Zebra mussels, you can drain a lake, let it dry for 2 years. Hopefully you can get rid of them that way, but once they're in, it's really difficult to get rid of them. Fluctuating lakes are a little bit better because that kind of drives down forward areas where they're found predominantly, but yeah, it's mainly to prevent the spread of them. So,
Where'd they come from originally?
Oh, they came from ballast waters and the Great Lakes and kind of spread from there at that point. I can't remember what year that actually started, but
Where are they native to?
Europe, yeah. Yeah, so, and the biggest deal is it's not a huge impact to fisheries either. I mean, it's infrastructure, piping, irrigation, valve structures and everything else, and dams, which are hugely expensive, so. Any other questions on that portion?
Are there any water bodies in western South Dakota that are known to be infected with the zebras?
No, no.
And with Angostura, are the quaggas confirmed, or is that sort of iffy?
We sample that and do shoreline surveys, and they're found that 1 year and occasionally, but not in large amounts. And they're not as critical either because they're typically slightly deeper water habitat, and they don't colonize like a zebra mussel does either in the numbers. So
you're pretty sure they're there, but they're not really what you consider a problem.
They're not causing a problem there. Yep.
And I'll just mention too, reclamation, we do have an AIS program where we go out and sample pretty routinely at the reclamation lakes, so like Angostura and stuff. We are going out there and sampling and monitoring that.
So are you finding them then?
Oh, no, not, we've been good, we've been cleared, so, but we do keep regularly sampling. I think it was just kind of that 1 year where,
Yeah,
for
nothing
whatever
has been
reason,
there
ever since
since.
then, it's been good.
Yep. Yeah, and only word of caution with all the sampling, villagers, like they're doing too, like lake shark, nothing. Never hit on anything until all of a sudden there's adults. So, so that villager sampling, it can give you an indication, but it's no guarantee that something is not there. So hopefully we keep on the trend, protecting the west side of the river pretty much. So. Yes.
Does temperature affect where they're going to show up? Or?
Yeah, it can. I mean, productivity, basically, warmer waters, productive waters, you're going to find them, I think it's, 52, 54 degrees. That's when you'll see actual villagers in the water if they are going to be there. So one thing we do, we move fish around the state, gizzard, shad, and everything else to provide a prey base, but we have to make sure we're in on these waters before these temperatures are even reached where villagers can possibly be present. So.
Is DNA sampling helpful for identifying infested waters?
To this point, I don't believe so. It hasn't been successful. But. Okay, running out of my time here.
Okay, I was kidding.
The other thing Dan talked about were the dredging projects that we've done. West Dakota was a huge part of investing in a hydraulic dredge, which we purchased. DA&R was also, City of Rapid City, Black Hills Fly Fishers put in on that. But we started with Canyon Lake, dredged about 9,000 cubic yards of sediment out of Canyon Lake. And luckily, West Dakota needed some of that material also because we needed a place to put it. That was the biggest thing. So they went to the cement plant, School of Mines, or Star Village there. It went up to a farming establishment. Pretty much anyone that wanted it could have some of it. So, and since then we've done Sunday Gulch, Wicksville, which is out on exit 90 there. Took about 3,000 cubic yards of sediment. In that case, what we did, we actually just leveled that out when we were done and planted it as a food plot. So a lot better usage than moving it around. Because I think we spent about $45,000 in hauling material out of Canyon Lake as it was. And then our next project will be finish up the outdoor campus pond in the back, dredging that material out of there too. So we're going to keep that rolling. It's been kind of sitting there this year. It kind of went 3 years straight. So it's kind of sitting at the moment. I didn't have my seasonal interns or seasonals this year. So, but some other projects that we're doing, it's kind of outside the district, but an aeration system on Sylvan Lake, replacing that just to break up the water column, keep it from stratifying as bad as it does, and improve the water quality. Stockade Lake in the future, next couple of years hopefully, that's a total drain and redoing of that lake. So that's probably about a $3 to $4 million project. We did sediment samples, took over 800 measurements in there in the wintertime, and I think we had 180,000 cubic yards of sediment, and that wasn't even the whole lake.
So the intent of that is sediment removal?
That's a draining, yep, right. Sediment removal, access improvements, yep, same thing. That'll be a big, big project. Newell, we talked about some of the dams that money has gone to. Newell Lake, that spillway system blew out 3 years ago, and we're finally going to replace that this summer. And when that's drained down, we're also going to dredge that upper end of Newell Lake out also. So, then some stream projects. We have phase 2 of Dakota Basin, which will be about a 2.5 mile stretch, adding structures to improve habitat complexity in there and kind of stabilize some of the banks as well.
Is that below the dam?
Below the dam. Yeah, we did a project in there about 1.5 miles in 2016, and this is kind of a continuation of that. So it'll go all the way down to Placerville Church Camp. So, Yeah, but that's all I really had, just a quick update. A lot of our projects are in, the rest is western South Dakota, and there's a lot of things coming up, dredging projects in Custer State Park. So there's a bunch that's going to happen pretty soon. So, any questions at all?
From your perspective, what do you see as the most serious forthcoming problem in the Hills region?
As far as just water quality, water availability?
Anything. Is it invasive species? Is it water quality deterioration? Is it reductions in water quality?
Yeah, I mean, we're actually...
Is it lake access?
Well, access is a big component that we work on, and like cattails and everything else, pretty much plugging it up, lack of fishing areas. That's a huge part of what we're working on. The hills are actually pretty good. I mean, there's some portions that need to be improved. Water quality in general is quite good. I mean, we're known for trout here. Those lakes still get kind of warm,
How do you get rid of cattails?
How? Well, Wicksville, we just had a contract, and Long Reach Excavator took them all out. The other way is spraying. You can do also, but there's just so much material there. It was like, we'll take them out and then we'll control them afterwards another way. So pretty much if you look anywhere in western South Dakota, it's hard to get to the water.
Yeah.
So that's what we're trying to improve. So we're adding ramps, fishing piers, removing cattails, all those kinds of things.
All right.
Has Game and Fish been on the receiving end of any of these ARPA funds that Jay had talked about, or would there be potential for things there?
There is, and we're fortunate in the last couple of years with the habitat stamp. Anyone that hunts or fishes knows about this. It's a $10 fee for residents, $25 for non-residents, that gets added to a fishing or hunting license one time per year. So that money basically comes to our wildlife program or fisheries, depending on who bought the license. If you buy a fishing license, $10 comes to us. If you buy a hunting license, $10 goes to wildlife. And otherwise, if you buy both, it's split. But so fisheries gets about $2.5 million a year, which is unbelievable, and that has to go into access and habitat. So we have a source right there. We have a lot of big projects coming up, like lake renovations, where we need to try to match that money. Because the east side of the state, same way. I mean, there's some projects that are going to be, $5-6 million projects. So that'll eat that money up pretty quick. But
maybe us thinking a little bigger than that. I mean, like hypothetically, sediment removal in Angostura or Belfouche reservoirs. There's big sediment.
Oh, there is.
I'm just brainstorming.
No, even if you look
eligible or out of the question.
I think you may run into some other complications for Belfouche.
Irrigation.
There's irrigation impacts, but there's also legacy impacts and sediments impacts. From my experience.
Anyhow, it sounds like probably not feasible, Shay. I'm less worried about complications than
timeline issues. As Susan Quincy said, there are other mechanisms. Doing that place which like Bell would be stopping the sediment from coming in. I mean, if you've got a lake that's loaded, and your solution is to simply suck the mud out of the lake and not stop the loading, that's a fool's errand. So.
That's right. That's what we're looking at too, like Stockade. They'll have a whole catch basin installed up above that, so whenever we do a big project, there'll be preventive measures to trap the sediment beforehand.
The ARPA funding is more for construction level stuff. I mean, and even there, it's taking up, ARPA's paying for a lot of other things, and that's freeing up general fund money that's going toward dams, for Eldon and Newell, Fish, a few others for school funding.
All right, time to take a break.
How long?
10 minutes. 15. We got some cookies over here and some water.